We are here today to talk about CMMC. We are recording this, so we'll make this available online afterwards, and we'll send this out to the people that missed it. You can put questions into the chat, and I'm also going to put a link into the chat a couple of times that will give you the 7 phases that we're going to be talking about today. I'll start that out now. Okay, so let me welcome everyone. There we go. So let me first introduce myself. I am Ken Fanger, the president of On Technology Partners, and I am a CMMC RP. I've been doing this now for 30 years, so it's been a long time. And then presenting with me today is Michael Weisskopf. He is our Chief Operations Officer, and he's our lead engineer for CMMC. He has also gone through the CCP training and is a CMMC RP as well. And he's got 15 years of this fun and exciting stuff. So just so we kind of cover what we're going to cover today. So first of all, we're going to talk about what is CMMC? Where did it come from? What's the timeline people are going to be experiencing and why it matters? Then Michael is going to do a deeper dive into the 7 phases that you'll go through to become CMMC compliant, and then keep that compliancy, because this is not a one and done situation. This is a constant journey. Then we'll talk about what are the next steps. How do you know if you should be doing CMMC? What is CMMC for your organization? What you can look forward to and how you get there. And then we'll take a few minutes and talk about joint ventures, because as you can imagine, this is not a cheap process. So we're looking at for some of the smaller companies, and I'll talk why this might be something of real value that we're looking at doing. We are going to be getting our own CMMC certification in June, and we'll explain. Michael has a great explanation for why we're doing that. And so you can see kind of how the journey is going to lead up, what your organization is going to face, and why you want to do it. So let me first start with a real quick timeline. So in October of last year, can't believe it's last year. I keep figuring it's still 2024 in my mind. They decided to make the final ruling, so it became effective. So effectively on October 15th, CMMC started. In December, they published it, and that's when they could start actually doing assessments. Then in first quarter, you can now go out and get your assessment. You don't need it to get the current contracts. The only thing you need to do to get current contracts is put in your SPRS score, which we'll talk about in phase 1. But by 2025, at the end of 2025, you'll start to see some of the contracts coming out. In October of 2026, requirements for level 1, 2, and 3 will be implemented. Now that seems like that's a long way away. Don't have to worry about it. But as we take you through this, you'll see it takes anywhere from 8 to 12 months to do this. So it's a significant journey that you're going to be doing. And we'll talk about why that is, what that is, and how that's going to affect. And then the full implementation of CMMC will be done over 7 years. And it looks like the government is going to be looking to move CMMC to all government contractors as this moves forward. So not just us in the DoD, but all across the government space. So let's take a minute and talk about why this came into being. So back in 2016, we realized that all the threat actors were basically able to take the information that was important to us. And one of the problems that you have is most of the time when a cyber attack happens, it's something you see. It's ransomware. It's a phishing attack. They're trying to steal email. The problem that comes when you're in the DoD is a lot of times they don't want you to know they're taking the information. So you may never realize that they've hacked you, because they don't want you to know they found out what the dimensions for a tire on a jet fighter is. They want to use that later. And so you could be breached and never even realizing it was happening. So they came up with this idea of asking, it's the only way I can say it, asking everybody to do NIST 800-171. So that came out with DFAR 7012 in 2017. The problem was the government didn't put any requirements to actually do it, so it was a paper tiger. It was something they really wanted you to do, and they were angry you didn't do it, but you didn't lose a contract for it. So you'd have a situation where you could spend $100,000 to get this compliance, but your competitor wouldn't, and they would win the bid in the lowest bid competition. So they realized without putting some teeth back there, it wasn't going to matter. And that's where DFARS 720 or 7020 and 7021 created the CMMC work frame that we have today. So now you can lose your contract. You can be charged with a Christian act, which is basically a fraudulent claims act. They can come after you for a wide range of why you didn't do it. And if you have a contract and they put a CMMC requirement on it, you can then lose that contract if you don't have CMMC. So it took it from, it'd be nice if you did it, to do it or else. And that's kind of where we're at this point. So now what I want to do is I want to kind of explain very top level, what is CMMC and how does it work? So there are 3 levels to CMMC. There is level 1, and level 1 is just you have a government contract, but you have no controlled unclassified information. And if that's the case, you have a relatively easy security framework that you do. You have basically, I think it's 17 steps, and you can meet those. The problem is most people are not going to fall into that. You're going to have some type of controlled and classified information for most of the contracts. And I'll give you an example. We were doing a presentation a while back, and there was a cleaning company that cleans one of the Air Force bases. They have blueprints and maps of the base. That's controlled unclassified information. They didn't realize they had controlled unclassified information. That moves them from level 1 to level 2. One of the big differences between level 1 and most of level 2 is level 1, you can self-attest, meaning you tell the government, I did it. That's all they need to hear. They're happy. Level 2 requires a third-party assessor. And most companies are going to fall into that level 2, except for a very limited group. You have to have somebody come in and confirm that you are doing CMMC. Those are called C3PAOs, third-party assessing organizations, because the government loves its acronyms. So that's where most of us are going to play. And then if you have some really critical CUI that's just below classified, you're going to have to take an extra step. So you have to get level 2, and then you have to do additional, and then the government itself comes out and certifies you. That's pretty much only going to be to the very large government contractors, but it is something you want to look at when you're doing contracts. I want to take another minute here because the other piece of this that's important is it's not just the prime that has to be certified. So if you're a prime and you have subs, those subs have to be certified to the level of the CUI that they have access to. So if they're looking at a blueprint that you have, they have to show that they're also certified and can protect that information. There are some ways to work around that, and I'm not going to get into that in this presentation, but if you'd like to understand how that works when you have subcontractors working with you and some of the things you might be able to do, we can talk afterwards, and you can reach out to info@ontechnologypartners.com and we can help you through that. So what does it mean to be level 2 certified? So there is 14 domains, 131 practices, or 110 practices, sorry, 320 objectives, which turn into 975 different actions that have to be done, as we say, one scary project. So you see that there's a lot of work to do in this. And this is a cyber maturity model certification. That means that they're expecting you to show that not only do you have it in writing, but you do what you write. So that's going to be an important part of the assessment, is they're going to talk to people and see, oh, when somebody's fired, do you actually follow your termination policies? Do you follow your access policies? Do you record when you add a new user? Do you make sure they are using zero trust? So this is a major project. You have to go into it eyes wide open, fully understanding that this is not something you're going to be able to do if you get the contract RFP. you're not going to have it done by the time the contract gets awarded in most cases. So you're going to have to do this beforehand. And if you already have contracts, if they're longer than a year, you can expect that they're going to turn around and ask you to do it as part of that. Now, one of the nice things here is the government has says that you can charge more if you do implement this. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how you put that in because you can't have a special line item for security. So you have to just increase the cost you charge the government to cover in what they call reasonable costs. And here is a terrifying but absolutely exciting statistic. So I was at Georgia Tech for a conference and they were talking about CMMC, and they estimated that 80% of businesses are going to be driven out of the DIB, Defense Industrial Base, by CMMC. Sad news is that's a lot of companies that are going to be knocked out. The good news is that that gives the companies that remain a competitive advantage. You have a great opportunity to really grow your business if you get this certification, because all of a sudden, imagine 80% of your competitors are gone from your market in 2 years, puts you at a real advantage. So it's a scary number, but it gives a lot of advantage to those that do the effort and get ahead. Okay, so I'm going to be passing this over to Michael. I'm just going to tell you what we're going to hit really quick here. So we're going to talk about the 7 phases. Phase 1 is your scoping phase. We also want to make sure that we're getting stakeholder buy-in. So you want to make sure that you really want to do this. You do not want to have a situation where you start this journey and then you realize it is a journey. This is not going to be something you're going to do as a secondary thing on the side. You have to commit to it. Then phase 2 is building out your virtual environment. That's your Office, that's your Google. So that's your cloud workspace. You do need to look at, we do Microsoft, so I'm going to talk Microsoft, but you have to look at Microsoft Cloud, which is GCC, or if you do have ITAR requirements, that would be GCC High. Then after that, you have to look at your physical premise. That includes physical security, that includes any servers, networking, and devices that are on your premise. Phase 4, you want to finalize your policies. You should be creating policies in every phase, but that's where you finalize everything. You also put your operational policies that you're creating. Phase 5 is making sure that your team is trained, making sure they understand what they have to do. You do a risk assessment, and then, of course, you're going to want to do a self-assessment. You want to make sure, kind of like a pre-briefing for lawyers, you want to sit down and do a kind of a mock exercise to see how things are going to go when the assessors come in so that people aren't caught off guard. Then phase 6, we can't do phase 6. You cannot have the consulting company and the assessing company be the same company. They're not allowed to be interconnected. So your C3PAO would be come in, do the assessment, give you your score. And of course, we love to say celebrate the win. So when we succeed, you'll have put in a lot of work, be excited about what you did. But it's not done that. You still now have every 3 years, you have to reassess. And you have to make sure that you attest every year that you're doing what you say you're doing. And make sure you do what you say you do, because they will come after you for 3 times the value of the contract if you don't. So now, Michael, I'm going to pass this over to you to start with phase 1 scoping.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So, phase 1 of CMMC is the most important phase of the project. So, a lot of work happens in the phases to follow, but all of the work that happens in the phases to follow phase 1 are based on the decisions that you make in your phase 1. So in phase 1, it's important to understand, document the flow of CUI. So again, we're talking at this from a level 2 CMMC perspective, the 110 controls, the full NIST 800 171 structure. So understanding your CUI flow is very important, and it's going to help determine what the scope needs to be. Your scope is what you define as a company. It's something we obviously we're here to help people with, is to determine that scope and really limit it to what it really needs to be. When you look at the operation for those contracts on the work, what information is the CUI and where does it need to flow through the organization so we can make sure that we, create an environment where where that information can be protected based on all of the controls, but not necessarily have to protect every computer in the company. So that's what we usually look to. We have some clients that they can't do that. They literally everyone participates. So, they have to their scope is their entire environment. But we first look to understand that CUI flow so you can make a decision based on that CUI flow. And then once that's done, we start creating the initial SSP, which is your system security plan. Um, Once you have your basic system security plan, you end up with a current score. Okay, where are we at right now? If you're building up a new system, your score is going to be very low. If you're using your existing systems to fill where your gaps are in the controls, then you may have a score that's middle of the road, and then you just have to then create what's called a POAM, or plan of actions and milestones. And that would be all the things that we're not currently doing against this standard of controls. And when are we going to implement those over time? So phase one, really, like I said, it's the most important phase in a sense that once you determine what that scope is, that scope really determines your overall effort in this process, your overall cost. How expensive is this going to be? How many systems do we have to have in this scope? So the more systems, the more cost. The more people in the scope, the more cost. The more training you have to do. So really, like I said, understanding the CUI flow and building a scope, and the scope is what you give to the assessment organization in the end to say, this is our scope. It consists of this system, these computers, and this is how it is protected from everything else that we do, kind of thing. And like Ken said, also very important to have the stakeholder buy-in at this point, because you're going to then implement from phase two on all the things that you've decided. So quick talk about the proposed rule, which came out in 2023. It actually called for MSPs, or your IT partners, to also get certified. And they would have had to get certified if they're working with someone who is also needs certification as part of the flow down, like Ken was talking about. But the final rule that came out in October of 2024, just last year, and that went live in December of 2024, removed that requirement for MSPs to be certified. What they did instead is they require those people, process, and technology, which is really, I'll get into that a little bit later, but the people, process, and technology of an MSP would just become part of the scope of the organization. So two certifications wouldn't be needed, but you would have to include those people into your entire to all your processes, your technology, and therefore get them certified along with you. So what we've decided to do is to get certified ourselves. So we get our CMMC level 2 certification that provides an automatic for our clients. We can show that through Flowdown that we are a certified company, and therefore there's less steps on the client side. So this is a benefit to our clients once we get our certification. We also believe it demonstrates the ability to assist our clients, right? If we get certified ourselves, you can see that we're going to be able to help you also get certified. So we think those 2 points was enough for us to move forward to to go down the certification road, which we're in the process of doing now. Um, so those are my main phase one points. We'll move on to phase two. So phase two, you've made this decision. You've got a scope. We're going to talk about this from a Microsoft perspective. You've selected Microsoft 365 to GCC version, which is what you need for a CMMC level two compliant environment. You don't have any ITAR requirements that need you to get into their separate GCC high product, but just Microsoft GCC. Um, you you need to harden this environment. So phase two, we really, this is most people aren't, you don't have GCC already. You don't get GCC. It's more expensive than the regular Microsoft 365 commercial. You don't typically have it. Most people don't have it right now that are looking at this. So we have to implement a new system. And we have to harden that system. Hardening that system, think of it like putting locks, alarms, and other security measures on your house to prevent a burglar, right? That's what hardening of IT systems are. It's putting these extra pieces in place that's going to protect it. That it doesn't come when you purchase Microsoft 365, they don't give you that account with all of their possible locks and alarms turned on. So we have to go in and do that. And that is what this phase is all about. It's going through and this can apply to any cloud environment in this phase two. The cloud environments that you decide to use need to be hardened. And we do this all and focus on this in phase two. And while we do that, we document screenshots. So, as an example, you might put in a conditional access policy that means that when someone logs into your Microsoft 365, they have to be coming from the United States and they can't log in from another country. So if that's a control that we're putting in, you're going to put that, we're going to take screenshots of that stuff. We're going to document it, create the evidence that we need for later, and make sure that that part of the policy is starting to be created. So all of the controls as we build out the cloud environment, as we harden it, is going to be documented as we go. And then we're going to update our POAMs for those specific controls because we had our initial plan of actions, and we're going to be some of them are going to be done in phase two, not everything, but all the cloud touching things. And so that'll lead us into phase three, where now we're going to focus on your on-premise. So what servers do you have in the office that we need that have access or have CUI stored on them? Those things also need to be hardened according to all of the controls of CMMC. So you're going to be doing things like hardening the firewall that controls your internet access, hardening those servers. It could be that you're implementing security technical implementation guides. These are guides like the DoD releases that says this is a way to secure Windows Server 2022, and it's a bunch of stuff you have to do. Um, but this is the focus on in-house stuff. Now, depending on what the scope is, all this stuff goes back to the scope. Well, what is the scope? Well, if the scope is GCC in the cloud and I have local workstations, but I don't have servers, I don't have to worry about servers. I have to harden those local machines that's gonna have the CUI on it, either sitting on it or accessing it on the screen to see it, and then it's in GCC. However, it's done. Those local systems, and this is phase three. This is all about what physical devices um, on on premise that you physically hold or can grab onto a computer, a firewall, a server, any of that kind of stuff. Um,
I just want to share really quickly before we go into
sure.
phase four, two things. One, for an example, for everybody on this call, a firewall, 80% of firewalls still have the default password as their access password. and a lot of them are open for the internet management. So that's an example of hardening, making sure that the internet cannot get to the management interface screen and not using Cisco, which is the Cisco password for those devices. Now we laugh, but if you go and look, I think they had 80% of Cisco firewalls still have the default password as their password.
Hmm.
So those are very simple. Michael gets really deep into that. But the thing is, the default settings are what everybody knows and it's easy to find. So you want to make sure that you're not in that situation. The other piece on the physical premise conversation is you'll also talk about physical security. Do you have cameras? Do you have your doors locked? Do you have a sign-in sheet? And those types of steps, which you may or may not have, but you have to do to be compliant. So you may not do phase three if you're all on premise in phase, or phase two if you're all on premise in phase one, but you will have some phase three items because you're still going to have physical security unless you're a completely virtual company, in which case you may be able to declare that as non-applicable. I just wanted to mention those two things because I know people hear hardening and they're like, what does that mean? And your house description was phenomenal. But when it comes to technology, how many of us leave the default passwords because it's easy? The problem is it's also easy for the hackers to use that same exact password to get
Yep.
in. So just thought I'd mention that.
Yep.
And now we're on to phase four.
So phase four is going to be about policies and procedures. So as I mentioned, phase two, and maybe I didn't mention phase three, but as you're doing the same thing in phase three, you're documenting those things that you're, doing as far as how you're storing the password for that. Because you change that password on that Cisco to something that's more secure, you now have to have a way to store that password safely. So that password has to be encrypted and stored in a certain way. So that would all be documented as part of phase three. And then phase four, you're really bringing this all together. So there are 14, Ken mentioned earlier, there are 14 domains. And what we do is we create policies for each domain that brings together the technical controls to the non-technical controls. So the non-technical controls are examples as incident response plan. It's really just what is the plan if something happens? What do we do? How do we react to that? And and it's a detailed plan of all the things that you would do if there was an incident, all the people that you need to tell, all the people that are going to assist you with it, and what everyone's role is in that. Well, it's not really a technical control. It's not a switch you turn on or off or a lock you put on. It's more of a process that you need to follow if something happens. So that would be picked up in phase four. And physical security. So really, the actual locks and the actual the things, the sign-in sheets in your facility, people coming in the door. How do we walk them around? All of that stuff is not a computer related control, but it's also very important that people just can't walk in, walk around, walk into your server room. Walk up to a computer that has access to CUI. People don't have that kind of access unless they are one of the people that is trained and part of your scope to actually see that information. So physical security is another one. Some of these are really mixed. There's within a domain, there's non-technical parts of it and there are technical parts of it. And so we really need to kind of bring those things together in phase four, where we finish out all of the policies and procedures for the entire 14 domains, all 110 controls. We finished that all out. And again, we update our POAM, we update our SSP. We're keeping all that stuff up to date. I didn't mention the shared responsibility matrix. That's also there. This is basically a control by control. Who's responsible for what? Is that something that you do in house? This one, we take care of this. Who takes care of some of these? If you buy Microsoft GCC, there are some controls that Microsoft takes care of because they house the physical servers. So you don't have to worry about physical control of a server that's in a Microsoft data center. So there is a shared responsibility to this entire thing. Some things we help our clients with. So On Technology Partners is the responsible for some controls. So it all depends on everything and the personnel you have and who's going to be able to help you, but they all need to have responsibilities assigned to them. So,
And
um,
really quick, it's super important that responsibility matrix, if you do have an MSP, you really need to make sure that's defined. And that should be whether you're in CMMC or not. Who's responsible? If they're taking care of your backups and your backups have CUI, they need to show how they're doing that. So when you're working with an MSP, you want to always be looking at your shared responsibility. Who is ultimately responsible? Where is your data? And how do you guarantee that it is safe and secure? Now, here it becomes part of the requirement to be compliant, but it's always a good thing to have anywhere you go.
yeah,
And I just want to, when we get over here to phase 5, I just want to take a quick second. So on the training side of it, we are talking with STS, Montez, as a way to help figure out how to have a testing um, training. So basically training that you can show is having an impact. So that's one of the things when you're doing the training, you want to make sure it's actually being impactful. And that's one of the partnerships we're looking at moving forward with. So again, if anybody's interested in that, they can reach out to us at info@ontechnologypartners.com. Actually, it's ontechpartners.com, and we can help explain that further. Go ahead. Why don't you talk about some risk and
yeah.
self-assessments?
So phase five is basically, in a sense, the technical and the non-technical. All the items have really been done, right? We've already put all the things in place that we need, but phase five is now going to be making sure that everybody's trained. Everybody understands what the risks are in their role for that CUI. So it's going to be slightly different for administrators versus maybe just someone who's working on the contract. So, but everybody's role needs to be trained. So training is a important part of this. A risk assessment needs to be done. So risk assessment on what are the potential things and ways that people can get unauthorized access to any of your CUI. So you go through a process of of it's what's the best word? It's a exercise, right? You're going through a an exercise of what are the things that could happen and going through and how do we remediate those things. So that's part of phase five. And then once you get all of that stuff done, you're going to do a self-assessment. So a self-assessment is where you really start from the beginning and you look for just like an assessor would do, except you're doing it yourself. And that's where I really want to talk about this. Kind of will go in a little bit into phase six, but basically a C through PAO is the which is a certified third-party assessment organization. They will be doing the assessment based on three things: evidence, interviews, and actually tests. Those are so every single control that is in this process, they need to pass it two out of three of these. So, in order for you to pass each line item, they have to see evidence, and then they're going to do an interview. Typically, those are the main two. They're going to see documentation, right? They're going to read through your documentation. Then they're going to ask the appropriate person, like a question about it, or a few questions. They're going to have some dialogue about the process, about the technology, whatever it is for that control. And if those answers and those things make sense and everything matches up, then they will be able to check the box and move on to the next one. Maybe it's a little bit confusing. Well, they have the option as well to say, what can you show me? Show me is the test. Oh, show me where your multi-factor authentication is set up, or show me how your multi-factor authentication works. And you literally pull up your computer, you log in, it pops up a box that says, I need a second approval. You pull out your phone and you say, here it is. I hit approve and I logged in, and they witness that control in action. Or they ask to see, where do you have the list of authorized users? Where's that at? I need to see it. And then they look at that list and they check, say, okay, let's look at your system access and let's see, does it match? So there's all kinds of things that they could test. Most of the time, people are going to, at least from the training that I was gone through, most of the time they're going to be heavily looking at the evidence and doing the interview, and they'll, because if you test every one, it's going to take an awful long time, but they're going to want to test some things along the way. Um, so so that is what the self-assessment is. You're doing that on your own, um, to really try to validate that you've done everything you need to do before you go into the assessment. And then phase six, like these are kind of a little, the last part of phase five and phase six are kind of very similar. But I talked about that. In fact, I think I talked about all the points I wanted to talk about, unless Ken, you have anything else on the assessment itself. We will sit in for our clients. On and help with evidence interview. We'd be there for interviews for technical controls that we help our clients with. Some of our clients don't have a IT person on staff, so it's us to help them with that. So we have to be there. We have to be there for them to answer questions about what that technical control, why, how it was set up, and why, and answer questions about the policies and procedures that they're seeing, and again, if that stuff makes sense, and then they could then move on to the next one. So we're going to be helping our clients with this part of the process as well.
One thing, Michael, that's super important. There are certain of the 110 controls that absolutely have to be passed. And then there are, I think, like 20 or 15 that if you don't pass, they will be give you some time to get them aligned. Um,
Yeah.
so it's critically important to remember that. Go ahead, Michael. Why don't you give a
Yeah,
little?
yeah. Basically, like we call them deal breakers, kind of like there's controls, and if you I didn't really get into the scoring of the SPRS, but basically the scoring of the SPRS, every control has a value. Usually it's one, three, or five, and all the like fives, and I think if not all, most of the a lot of the threes are deal breakers. They're worth more points because if they're very important ones, and if you're not doing those, you can't pass your assessment. Whereas if you miss on a 1.1, you can still get certified. You can actually get certified as long as you have 80% score or higher, and none of those, and all, well, and all of the deal breaker ones you pass. If you pass all of the 3 and 5 point questions, and you have even quite a few of the one pointers not done, you can pass the certification with an 80% or higher, with the caveat that you are going to address those again in POAMs. So you're going to create POAMs right out of the certification that says we failed these 5 line items. We're going to have those implemented by, you get a date with the see-through PO. I think the max is up to 6 months, depending on what it is, and then they would then come back, and obviously they're working with you on scheduling, but they're going to come back, and they're going to assess those again, and then if those are then taken care of, then you get your final certification. The good news on that whole process is once you get the 80% score or higher certification, you can keep working with your contracts. It will not hold you back. You don't have to wait for the time to implement. You just have to implement, get the now if you didn't do that in the time period, then your certification would be rejected at that point. But you would have time to get those done. So those deal breakers are really important. Obviously, we know which ones they are. It's, part of our process is to have some emphasis on those. Um, but yes, that is very important.
So, okay. And the best part is after you get your assessment, you want to celebrate. You guys have done this for most people. It's usually a 12-month process. It's very intense. You have to commit to it. This is not going to be an easy thing. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, we'll come in and just do it for you and you'll be fine. Be afraid of anyone that tells you they're going to come in and get you compliant without you being part of the journey, because more than likely it's not going to go the way you hoped. We've had a couple of companies that had people that came in and did that. And then about 6 months later, we got a call from them asking if we can help. So this is a major thing. You should be very proud of it. Like I said, this is going to really wipe out a lot of your competition. You have made a major achievement. So remember, I always say, celebrate the wins. This is one of those you really want to. And then after you finish celebrating the wins, what do you do, Mike?
Yeah, so like it doesn't end. So basically, um, CMMC requires recertification every 3 years. And you also have to self-assess every year. So every year you have to go on your own and go through the self-assessment process, which was part of phase 5. You're doing that same thing each year. Um, Compliance is a journey, not a destination. That's kind of the catchphrase that is pretty good. You don't really ever get there. You're always maturing in your security, but you never be like, okay, we did everything, we're good. Now we'll get our contracts and we'll be secure forever. That's not the way it works. It's going to be a constant journey. So, there's a lot of change management. So when configurations change, you can't just go in and change it. You have to track that. You have to test that. It requires some ongoing things that have to happen. And that's what phase 7 really is all about. Um, a big point is any major changes. So if you have to switch from GCC to GCC high, that is as a major change in your systems. You're going to want to plan that out along with when you need to get your certification. So you're going to want to use your existing environment up until the 12 months prior. You want to plan to do this. You have to do it again because it's a major change. Giving someone a new computer isn't going to change your environment, right? New user, their computer upgrade, you're going to have to still do change management, make sure that system gets the correct configurations. You're going to do all that. You're going to document within your existing compliance systems. But if you change something major, like the RCUI is stored at GCC, and now we're going to Google or we're going to GCC High or something big, you are going to have to get recertified in that new environment. And so like we're trying to plan these things out with our clients so they can see, okay, you're setting up this system now. It's going to be good for 3 years. If you need to move to something else, this is the time to start that project. Then you can get recertified in that, prior to the 3 years, which you would be doing anyway. So whenever possible, we're trying to get ahead of that process and try to plan those things out. So it really is an ongoing thing to keep up with everything that CMMC requires.
And I think it's really important to mention here, if you do a major change to your environment, your CMMC certification becomes nullified at that moment. So you have to take that very seriously because if you have a contract that requires your CMMC level, and so a big one they talked about at the CMMC conference was merging two companies. If you merge two companies and you merge their systems, you can invalidate your CMMC, which can invalidate your contract. So you have to be very careful when you do this, what you do. So if you do move from GCC to GCC high, you have to plan it out. You have to have your new environment already, certified it, and then transfer potentially. So if you're going to make that, and one of the things we talk to people when we're doing that scoping conversation is, are you going to be ITAR as well as CMMC? Because you might as well move to that place to begin with instead of trying to retrofit it later. So it does put a lot of extra pressure, but you want to make sure that you're doing that to save a lot of money in the future. Okay, so the question comes up, how do I know what I should be doing? Do I need CMMC? What's involved? So really quickly, one of the things this is a checklist we take through people. The first thing you do is, are you doing government contracts? Do you have DoD contracts if you're a sub or a prime? Then you want to try and figure out, do you have controlled unclassified information? I'll give you a couple hints. If you have emails that have the letter CUI in the subject line, You have controlled and classified information. You're going to be responsible for it. We have a customer that their government contractor keeps sending them everything. Even if it's how are you doing this weekend? It has CUI in the label. It becomes CUI. Next, you want to see, like if you don't have CUI, but you have government contracts, you might be able to self-put into CMMC level 1. If you don't feel you can do it, if you need help, that's where you kind of have that next thing. Then you want to try and figure out what type of companies do you want to work with? What is it you need? Then you'll move into the 7 phases and start with your initial scope. And also make sure you're filling out your SPRS, your Supplier Performance Risk System. You want to make sure that score is in there. That is a requirement right now to get government contracts. So you want to make sure that you do that. And you want to try and be as honest as you can. When we do scoping with you, we will make sure you put yours in and it'll be accurate, but it is possible and you might make mistakes. That's okay in the starting, but when you go for certification, you can't have it be wrong. And then take yourself through all 7 phases. Make sure you do everything you need to do. And then the other thing that I'm going to tell you is really critical. When you get your certification, take it serious that you maintain it. There's a lot of companies that I've seen that I've run into, not CMMC, but that do government work, especially ITAR, that met the requirements, got their check off, but then didn't continue to do it and started to kind of float into dangerous waters. The government wants to find the people that float into dangerous waters and then make examples of them. Throughout the training, they kept telling us they want that first person because they feel if they burn that first company, all the other companies will get in line. You guys don't want to be that first company. And if you're working with us, we'll make sure you're not that first company. But that's the government's mentality in this. And then you go on from there. Also, remember, you don't want to wait. There are 87,000 companies that are needing to get certified. I think we're up to 64 companies that are assessors at this point. So there is a big discrepancy. We are scheduled for June because we wanted to make sure we were getting ready for that. It's going to become a wave as it gets closer and closer to 2026. You're going to see that it's going to be harder and harder to find the time and effort. So if you wait to be one of the last ones to do it, you might be out in the cold when it comes to getting there. And I'm not getting the feeling the government's going to be gentle. They're going to say you should have been doing it. So remember that. And I just want to take a moment. This is an expensive process. You are talking probably 25,000 plus just for the assessment, and you're probably talking over 100,000 to get yourself ready, depending on your size and scope. So this is very expensive. And we are looking, since we are going to be certified, we're looking into how we might be able to bring smaller companies because we really don't want to see 80% of companies knocked out of the dip. We want to see if we can help reduce that. So we're working on making an environment that we can then bring smaller companies into so they can get that first contract, see how it is to work with the government, and then decide if they're going to move forward later on. So that's something, if you're interested, if you know people that are interested, let them reach out to us. We're working on the legalities of this as we go forward, but it might be a way to save people from having to do this very onerous process, but still letting them have access to do government contracts. You will, of course, have to use our systems, you have to follow our policies, do our training, but it gives you a chance without having to go through this process yourself until you know if government work is where you need to be. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Okay, that is the end of our presentation. We only went 5 minutes over. So I'll open it up for any questions that anybody might have. And I'm going to again, one more time, put the link to this into the chat so you can get those 7-phase document so you can see what it is. If you need to talk to anybody in your organization, you can use that to figure out how to move forward, what you want to do. Hopefully you work with us, but if you don't work with us, you want to make sure the company that you're doing the assessment with or the pre-assessment work follows some type of similar structure to make sure that you can achieve where you're trying to go, because trying to do 110 controls just willy-nilly is a real challenging journey. Trust us, we tried it the first time around. Okay, I'll leave this up for a minute. Any questions? I think you guys can unmute yourselves, or if you can't, send it in the chat and I'll unmute you. I guess we did such a phenomenal job. Nobody has any questions. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, then I'm going to thank everyone for attending. I think this was a phenomenal event. And of course, Michael, you always do amazing. You are definitely well versed in what's coming. So we're looking forward to talking to all of you, and we will be posting this up in the next few weeks so that you can watch this again. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.